Hey everyone, and welcome to the Joomla Shack conference. I'm Steve Burge. I've been your host for this event, and this is the final, the closing session of the event. I don't think we could have picked a more appropriate closing session. Joe is one of my oldest friends in the Joomla community. He wrote many of the first and most useful Joomla extension development tutorials. He certainly wrote the first Joomla extension development book. We have some useful Joomla tutorials on Joomla Shack that he wrote, over a decade or so ago. And Joe has used Joomla as the leaping off point for a full stack web dev career. His career has taken him into Ruby on Rails, deep into JavaScript. He's picked up all sorts of extra skills working for companies such as BigCommerce. And Joe's topic today is how you can do the same thing, how you can take the skills you use in the Joomla environment and build a wide-ranging and successful web dev career. Joe, I'm delighted to have you. I'm delighted to have you here to close out our conference. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Steve said, I'm a long time. I'm now kind of more of a former member of Joomla, kind of coming back and taking a look at Joomla. And so let's go ahead and take a look back at some of the history that I had. I'm going to go back to 2013, and I was pretty obsessed with Joomla. I had this license plate on my car in Virginia, and it was to the point I remember one day I was driving around and someone said that their husband wanted me to know that he was into Drupal. And we had that little rivalry going on, and I just had a laugh over it. So I was pretty obsessed with it. It had become my work and my hobby. It opened me up to a lot of friends from around the world, which gave me a great excuse to go travel. And it was all of these things together, which wasn't exactly the healthiest thing for me, I'm realizing in retrospect. And so I got to a point where I had to break up with Joomla. And to be clear, it wasn't you, it was me. I wanted to learn about something new, and I wanted to level up my career. And it was getting to a point where I was doing the same thing over and over again, where I was just creating a website and moving on to create another website and so on and so forth. And to be honest, I needed some more stable income. I had done a lot of freelancing and agency work, and while it was fun and it paid the bills, I needed something a little more stable. And finally, I had gotten to a point where I realized that I was using Joomla as a way of not dealing with a truth about myself. And there's a feature that I have here in scare quotes I was trying to maintain in my life was straightness. And I was trying to maintain this straightness to be in good standing with church people. Like I was trying to appease people and to make people like me because I was straight. And as I was beginning to realize that I was using the Joomla community to not deal with this, I realized that this wasn't worth it. And so on October 11th, I dropped support for that feature by coming out for good. And of course, being a CMS guy, I had to launch a website. And so I did that and came out of the closet and started with this post about a mug of questions. And so shortly after, in 2014, I went to a gay Christian network conference, and the Gay Christian Network started off as a PHP-based forum, sounding a bit familiar to us, maybe. And so finally got to meet some people who were in my position, where we were Christians, we were also LGBTQ, and trying to figure out how to make the two of those connect. And then I also found a new church. And this church was not only LGBTQ welcoming, but it was also a place where they emphasized asking questions over trying to find answers. And that's something that has really helped not only with my trying to reconcile my faith and my sexuality, but also in my career. And we'll see here in a bit. And then finally, I met Andrew, and we started dating. And then fast forward to 2017, and we got married. And then as a part of our wedding ceremony, one of the things that we did, instead of doing a unity candle or some other symbol like that, we decided to take a Scrabble board because we both love tabletop games. And we spelled out both of our names and some of our values on this Scrabble board. And I want to draw your attention to the one there on the right that goes up and down, hospitality. That is a big value that Andrew has taught me a lot about. It was something that I thought I was okay at. And then when we got married, I realized, wait a minute, I actually have a lot to learn in regards to hospitality. And so just in the practice of hospitality, like Andrew and I have been hosting these game nights and bringing people over. And I've been learning things like, maybe you might want to dish up food for people instead of just sending them to the kitchen and having them fend for themselves. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about hospitality. And one of the questions that came to mind was, how could I deliver hospitality through code? And this is really interesting. So I decided I am going to write some code to try to deliver hospitality and to make a hospitable place for people to kind of as an alternative to social media. And so I started this project called Truffle, and I wrote it in React and in JavaScript. And I wanted to avoid writing server technology in all of this for whatever reason. And so I started doing this. And what I ended up with was more of a format and less of a service. And it looked kind of like this, where this would be a JSON object. And notice there on the third property, there is a host ID. And the idea is that Truffle was this system of hosting conversations. And so instead of having like parents and children, it was always with the language of hosting hospitality. And another feature of this was that you could add any property you want, and Truffle would attempt to render it for you. And so that way you didn't have to have any sort of, you could just define these properties on the fly and it would just render them. And so this is what that one Truffle looks like rendered. And you'll notice up at the top is the host Truffle that this other Truffle was connected to. And this Truffle is considered a guest of the host Truffle. And it was a fun experiment, but I really found myself wanting more. It was a great way to teach myself some more JavaScript and to experiment with this idea of how could I deliver hospitality with code. But I also recognized that hospitality is not something that you can do in solitude. Just sitting there and coding away at my computer was not delivering hospitality with code. So forward to now, the 2019, here is my first confession of the talk. At first, when Steve announced that there was this opportunity to give a talk at this online Joomla day, I thought I was going to code up this impressive GraphQL demo component in an afternoon. If you're not familiar with GraphQL, it is a language that Facebook has created. And it's a way of, it's an alternative to REST is kind of the long and short of it. And there's a lot of tooling that comes with it and a lot of advantages. And I thought, yeah, I'll just code this up in an afternoon, no problem. I thought this was going to be the future of Joomla, that there's going to be this component that we could add to Joomla that would provide this GraphQL endpoint, and that all those coders would be able to use their tools, existing tools, to just talk to Joomla and to create articles and do everything and build their own user interfaces around it. And it was going to be amazing. And so I decided to start coding. So I pulled down a copy of Joomla and got it installed. And a lot of these memories were coming back. And I began to create my own component and refresh my memory as to how to create a component, because it had been a while, and created the XML manifest file and got the bare bones installed. So I had the front end, the back end of the component, and that XML manifest file. And at one point I realized, I actually need a couple of other sections for the back end of this component. I guess I need to change that XML manifest file and reinstall the component. And so I went to go reinstall the component, and it said that, and I was going to go uninstall it, and it said, this is going to delete your component entirely from the system. And I didn't believe it. I thought, this is just going to, remove the database records and everything and allow me to just rebuild it and I'll be fine. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I think it might actually delete it. And sure enough, I clicked the button and it deleted the component entirely. And at that point, I realized I was going to need to rework this talk entirely, that I was not going to be able to code something up really quickly, and that I was going to need to pick a different topic. And another thing I realized was, again, I was at this point where I was trying to add something to get coders to like Joomla, kind of back like with the feature that I had, like the false feature of trying to be straight, where I was trying to use that to get people to like me. I was trying to do the same thing to Joomla here, and it was a problem. I was also caught off guard by how much I missed Joomla. So for the last 5 years, I've been working at a couple of different companies, and both of them have been using Ruby on Rails to provide their services. And I've been coding almost exclusively in Rails and JavaScript. So after 5 years of Rails, there were several things with Joomla that I missed. I missed the ability to get it installed and running in just a few minutes. And then once it was installed, just already have this user and these sessions all ready to go. Didn't have to install any gems or anything to make that happen. I only needed one command line command to get Joomla running. And the command I used was PHP's built-in web server. So if I had a copy of Apache or Nginx installed on my computer, I wouldn't have even needed that one command line command. And then finally, I got all these messages because I had installed like an older version of PHP at one point using Homebrew. And I was just getting these messages explaining that my environment was going to need adjustments if I was going to be running the newer versions of Joomla in the future. But what I really missed the most was the hospitality of the Joomla community. The hospitality of the Joomla community created a coding school for the world. And to have a look at how that happened, I took a screenshot of the forum from a week ago. And these are all the different boards that we have on the forum that are for languages other than English. And you'll notice there we have over 500,000 posts, almost 600,000 posts in non-English languages, with over 100,000 topics. And, this is not entirely by accident, because in Joomla's mission statement, the mission is to provide a multilingual, flexible, and free platform for digital publishing and collaboration. And to have a multilingual and multicultural project like Joomla, you have to provide a level of hospitality to make that happen. Otherwise, people who don't have English as their first language and are not comfortable communicating in English would otherwise be turned away, or would not have as smooth as an onboarding into the community. I really just want to emphasize, I've looked at a lot of open source communities, and there just are not many that have the extent of internationalization that Joomla has, both in the product itself and in the community. And then the hospitality there provides the safety necessary for asking questions. And by questions, I mean a lot of questions. There have been over 3 million posts on the Joomla forum and over 700,000 topics and members. And that is a testament to the hospitality of the Joomla community. We've had all sorts of questions about HTML and getting a secure site set up with SSL so you can do e-commerce. People have taught themselves CSS and model view controller and JavaScript and how to build an accessible website and all these different things just through asking questions and being a part of the Joomla community on the forum. Being able to ask these questions about software we're using allowed us to learn about programming by doing. We were able to, a lot of us had businesses or did freelancing based on providing services through Joomla. And so having this forum and being able to talk to people really helped us learn without having to necessarily go to a coding school. And this is where I realized that I need to ask another question aside from how to deliver code through how to deliver hospitality through code. Given all this, what are the values of hospitable technology? First, I'm going to say that hospitality often clashes with tech and open source values, and this is a good thing. It might not seem like a good thing at first, but it actually humanizes technology and helps us to learn and grow. So first, hospitality radically embraces people regardless of their technical abilities and contributions. This is in contrast to meritocracy, where the idea is that the most meritorious contributions are the most important. And in many open source communities outside of Joomla, people will kind of throw away the phrase pull requests welcome. The idea that you should just, if you want to see something in the software, you just need to write code to make it happen. Hopefully you have the technical ability to do that. And, other contributions are not as valued. But with hospitality, we value all contributions and we find ways to include people. Next, hospitality prioritizes gracious listening over free speech. There is a lot in open source culture that claims free speech as the reason to create open source software. And that's not really the reason that's not as much the motivation behind hospitable technology. Hospitable technology exists to make it possible to have a place where people can be listened to. Hospitality is not concerned with economies of scale. You can't really scale hospitality the way you can scale a piece of code or scale a design. Hospitality requires a lot of one-on-one conversations and relationship building. And that just doesn't scale the same way that code does. And finally, hospitality optimizes for the comfort of guests, not for the whims of geniuses. Hospitable technology is not there to write the prettiest code or the most elegant code. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with elegant code, but the priority for hospitable technology is really welcoming people in and providing a place where they can begin to discover and learn and ask questions. Ultimately, hospitality is about people and not about code. So given hospitable technology, what does this mean for the future of Joomla? There is a complex problem out there, and I'm going to describe it with 3 different points here. And the first one is that open source is in crisis. Open source is being abused now. There are governments and corporations that are using open source software for drones and for facial recognition and mass surveillance, and using code for purposes that are not the purposes that many open source authors had in mind when they released their code for free to the world. We should really be asking ourselves, is free speech really intended for governments and corporations? And is this really our cause? And there are some people who are asking this question and have come up with some different ideas. This one idea is the Hippocratic license, and it's based off the MIT license. And there's a clause in it that says you can use this software as long as you don't use it to commit human rights violations as defined by this article by the UN. And this is a relatively new license. It came out within the last couple of months. And there's some controversy over it as to whether it can actually be considered open source or not. But it's an interesting alternative to the licenses that are out there. And then next, the tenor of large social media networks has people looking for alternatives. We've just seen with Facebook and Twitter that the tone of discourse out there has not improved. It's been getting worse, and there is a lot of noise. And so what a lot of people have been trying to do for alternatives, I've seen people try to create private Facebook clones, like they'll have an open source piece of software that runs a server that acts kind of like your own private Facebook. And so some people have tried that. There's also the idea of a federated network that's more analogous to Twitter. There's a service out there called Mastodon that kind of acts this way where you can post your messages to a Mastodon server and it will try to publish it to all the other ones. And then some people are even trying to use blockchain technology to verify that people are actually posting what you're seeing them post. And the problem with these approaches is that throwing more code at the problem without hospitality is just not going to work. It's not going to bring in the safety and the ability to ask questions. Just like copying the same thing that Facebook and Twitter does, only having your own private version of it is not going to bring that culture. And then finally, coders have more choices for languages and frameworks now than ever before. Before we started this talk, I was having a little chat with Steve, and we were talking about all the different flavors of JavaScript that are available now. Like there's CoffeeScript, and there's this ES6 version of the newer version of JavaScript itself, and then there's TypeScript, and the list just goes on and on. And just trying to add these features to Joomla is not going to attract coders that have all this choice available to them. Another kind of sad point here is that coders are moving away from PHP, and I'm just as guilty of that as the next person. Just because we have all this choice and all of these new tools available for newer languages. So in other words, social media networks abuse open source and distract coders with these shiny new frameworks. And another confession here from me, I am a coder who gets distracted by these shiny new frameworks. I went off and learned a new one, and just to do that, this truffle project. So given this problem, what do we need to do as a community? We need to spread the culture of hospitable technology beyond the Joomla community, and we need to train the next generation of hospitable technology students. So the one thing that I've observed is that the next generation learns the front end first. I know a lot of people who have gone to commercial coding schools, and a lot of those schools focus on front end tools because they are very available, and you don't have to spin up a server that costs you money. You can just do all of your coding on your laptop and then like build it locally or build it with a service and then launch it and let it go, and you don't have to worry about it. So we need to meet this generation that is learning all this front-end technology there in the world of front-end technology. So this is where I would have said, here's an idea that I have. And I'm realizing in retrospect that I should be forming these in the phrases of questions, because just presenting an answer here at the end without a question doesn't really help us to think about the potential that we have. So the first question I have is, what if we treated Joomla as a backend API for messaging and publishing? So that way we could learn to write front-end code together. We could work with people who haven't worked with Joomla before and are primarily trained on front-end technology, and maybe provide a server for them and some projects that we could work on together. Joomla not only has the all-togetherness to make this possible, it also has the culture. Many of you who've been around for a while will remember that the word Joomla can mean all together or as a whole. And I think that's really apropos as to what Joomla provides and the culture that comes with it. And so as I'm wrapping up here, Joomla's future depends not on the specific features or adding things to make coders like the project, but on spreading this culture of hospitable technology. And as long as we listen, ask questions, and prioritize people over code, Joomla will have a bright future. So let's go do that. Thanks.
Oh, Joe, that was an awesome way to wrap up. Prioritize people over code.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty succinct description of what we tried to do in this conference and in Joomla in general. Joe, I think what you've done is really neatly wrap up the conference. I've been shocked almost at how helpful and how much time and effort some of the presenters have put into their sessions over the last 3 days. The design of some of the slides, the thought that's gone into them, I'd 100% put you in that category. And I'm thinking of many of the other speakers as well. We haven't paid them. I'd say that describing what they've done as an act of hospitality would be a perfect way to describe it. A lot of these speakers have done it because they enjoy welcoming others in to learn from them, to share what they know. I think you've really neatly put a bow on the whole conference and the hard work of so many of the other speakers.
Well, thank you.
And Joe, if you pop in the chat, some people are saying some very nice things about your presentation. I want to say a big hearty thank you to yourself, Joe, and to all of you that have attended. I've seen many of the same faces pop up again in session after session, and we really appreciate your support. It's a shame that many of you weren't meeting in London this weekend for the Joomla World Conference, but I hope what we've done here has been an act of hospitality to some extent in getting everyone together and sharing and learning from each other. I'd like to think the Joomla World Conference will be back again in 2020. I'm sure the Joomla Shack Conference will be in some form, maybe a little earlier in the year if the World Conference comes. But I hope to see many of you guys around on Twitter or on the Joomla forums or here at Joomla Shack asking us questions. And so I'm going to wrap up. Joe, it was a pleasure to have you to close out the conference. And thanks to all of you who stuck with us, attended the end of the last presentation. I really, really appreciate it, guys. I wish you all a great weekend and happy Joomling.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, everyone.